Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am just another tinfoil hat. Welcome to my show. Today we are going to be discussing probably one of the most well-known Wisconsin haunts, and that is the haunting of Summerwind Mansion. Now, yeah, Summerwind is definitely, I would say, one of the most well-known haunted locations in the entire state, which is saying something considering that we have a lot of famous haunted locations. It's been on innumerable TV shows, written up in tons of books. There's numerous websites devoted to it, countless articles. Even though the old place actually is no longer standing today. Now, Summerwind is, or at least was, located near Land O'Lakes, Wisconsin, and it didn't begin as a single-family home. It was actually built by John Frank as the West Bay Lake Resort, over the site of the homestead where he grew up. The story really starts, though, in 1916, when it was purchased by Robert Patterson Lamont, who was then president of the Simplex Railway Appliance, and would actually later go on to become Secretary of Commerce under President Hoover in 1929. And technically, I said it starts in 1916, that's when he purchased the property in the hopes of turning it into a single-family summer home. But it really starts 2 years later in 1918, when the renovations on the old place were completed, and it was completely converted into a summer estate for the Lamont family. And at this time, they actually referred to it as Lilac Hills. So it sounds perfect, right? But like 90% of horror movies about haunted houses, we will see how this dream home turned into a nightmare. Apparently, it's claimed that as soon as the family moved in, the maids and servants began complaining of odd occurrences, strange noises, weird odors, and just this sense that the place was, you probably guessed it, haunted. Tradition holds that Mr. and Mrs. Lamont didn't really believe these accounts very much, and until one night where they were finishing dinner, and the basement door began shaking violently, and this apparition manifested in front of it. So apparently Lamont was so convinced of this apparition that he fired at it, not once but twice. And the bullets went straight through whatever this thing was and into the basement door. Now, as of one of the last investigations at Summerwind, there were indeed 2 bullet holes in the door. As to whether or not they were caused by Lamont, meaning of course that the door was never replaced in all those years, that's not super clear, and there's actually another continuation of this story at a much later date. Now, the house changed hands quite a bit after the Lamonts sold it, and there's actually some confusion as to this point. Summerwind is kind of rife with these conflicting reports, conflicting information concerning dates and, what family owned it when and stuff like that. So yeah, as to when it was sold, some people claim that the Lamonts vacated as soon as the basement door incident happened. Other people say that Mrs. Lamont sold it after her husband's death in 1948. Whatever the case may be, it is generally agreed upon that the next family to own the property was the Kiefer family, and that they tried to sell it several times after the acquisition of it in the 1940s, each time ending with some sort of bad luck happening to the new owners, so they would relinquish the rights of the property back to the Kiefers. Now, it was 1972 when someone finally managed to pin down the sale of Summerwind, and that was the Hinshaw family, which consisted of Arnold and Ginger Hinshaw and their 6 children. And this is where the haunting legacy really comes into play. And what a legacy. I mean, honestly, it's kind of like the house on Haunted Hill minus the vat of acid and the cash prize. So the Hinshaws set to working on the dilapidated property right away. And right here, a lot of people cite that as, they angered the spirits, because there is a connection some people feel between doing renovations on old houses and awakening ghosts or something like that. Other people claim that Summerwind was just haunted all along. So, anyway, they started to work on the dilapidated property right away, and right away they also started having this classic haunting type activity. Sightings of moving shadows in the hallways and whispers and distant voices. There was also a very prominent apparition of a woman in white that was seen very often floating through these French doors or appearing to dance. I mean, you really do. You have quite the classic haunting right there. Appliances, such as the water heater, would mysteriously break down and then just, or perhaps more mysteriously, start working again. And that second bit is actually a very good thing, considering that according to the Hinshaws, they could not get anyone from town to come work on the haunted mansion. So, a quick note here. As someone who lives in a Victorian Gothic Revival house, I know firsthand how the simple look of a place can really determine someone's opinion of it. True, there have been several weird, unexplainable things that have happened in my home, but the bulk of people in my hometown who call it the haunted house don't know that. They're just going off of the fact that it does indeed look like a haunted house. So, whether or not there really was a genuine haunting legacy in the community for Summerwind, or if it was, just the big, old, majestic, creepy house that often sat vacant, that's kind of up for debate. But anyway, the activity definitely did not stop there. It only got worse. One day as Arnold was approaching his car, it mysteriously burst into flames. There was also this tattered lace curtain that Ginger would try to throw away, and it just kept coming back with a vengeance. It was like she couldn't get rid of it. So this ghost must have really been a stickler about windows, because another claim from the family was that they would constantly open and shut all the time. It got so bad that Arnold, who also, each member of the family, but particularly Arnold, was undergoing serious mental emotional strain during their stay at Summerwind. Arnold actually nailed the windows shut to stop this phenomenon. However, the pinnacle of all this activity was undoubtedly when they discovered the secret compartment behind a drawer in an upstairs closet. Upon investigation, this compartment contained a desiccated corpse. So, apparently Arnold and Ginger weren't entirely sure what sort of cadaver this was, and had quite possibly the best idea in the history of ideas. They decided it was a good idea to wait until their kids got home from school and send the oldest daughter back into this weird crawl space to figure out exactly what the corpse was. So just a news flash, it wasn't a raccoon. Apparently the daughter screamed and claimed that it was a human corpse, or at least part of one. She said that she saw a skull with kind of matted, tangled black hair, the portion of a leg, and an arm. Now, I don't know about you guys, but if I found a dead body in my wall, the very first thing I would do, I would definitely follow the Hinshaw's advice and not call the cops. And that's exactly what they did. They decided just to leave the corpse where it was, they scooted the drawer back in, and called it a day. Now, it was only 6 months that the Hinshaws lived in the Summerwind Mansion. According to reports, Arnold spiraled into an increasingly deep state of paranoia and obsession, sometimes even playing the organ, because of course this haunted mansion had an organ, for hours on end in some attempt to appease the spirits. He eventually left the house for treatment and never returned. Ginger purportedly attempted suicide near the end of her stay, and finally decided to pack up the kids and move to Grafton with their grandparents. So after they left the place, Ginger's father, Raymond Bobber, decided that he wanted to actually purchase the property in the hopes of turning it into a bed and breakfast. And that's exactly what he did, minus the end goal of turning it into a bed and breakfast. He did purchase the property, and he did stay on the property, though not inside the house for some weird reason. He opted to stay in an RV outside. So since her dad was planning on redoing the mansion, Ginger decided it was probably time to come clean about that old skeleton behind the closet. However, when the drawer was removed and everybody was bracing themselves for coming face to face with his corpse, they received a very large shock. It was gone. So, as to where it went, nobody really knows. Unless, of course, the haunting of Summerwind was actually not a haunting at all, but a zombie infestation. Other mysterious claims would come from this era as well. Bobber stated that the mansion would actually change dimensions, that it would, he'd measure a room one day, he'd go back the next day, and it had changed size, it's gotten bigger or smaller or something. The windows and doors continued to be a problem, and apparently that stupid lace curtain really came back with a vengeance then too. And then there's the really bizarre issue of the basement door. So as I mentioned earlier, the claim was that Robert Lamont had fired his pistol at an intruder, and the bullet holes remained in the basement door until the door itself mysteriously vanished in the 1980s. Well, one day, Ginger's brother Carl, who was helping with renovations, was busy shutting windows in preparation for a coming rainstorm when he heard someone call his name. So of course he goes looking around, of course he's alone in the house, and then he hears gunshots coming from the vague direction of the kitchen. So Carl enters the kitchen, which is filled with gun smoke, and sees 2 bullet holes in the basement door. Now this raises a lot of questions, because I always kind of wondered, sure, maybe it's a little cool that you shot at what you thought was some sort of phantom and missed it and the bullets went into the door, but I could never see that in all that time the door was never ever replaced. And here too you have Carl saying that he noticed these bullet holes. Is that to say that they actually were not there the whole time? I mean, it does raise a lot of questions, Combine that with a magical disappearing corpse, and you have something that now is a little bit more complex than your typical Scooby-Doo style phantom. You kind of have the question of, is this a place where reality, time and space just kind of doesn't work the way that we think it usually does? But there's actually even more to this story. Bobber had his own obsession with the Summerwind Mansion, and that is the long, complicated story of Jonathan Carver and the mysterious land deed. Apparently, Bobber claimed to have been in contact with the spirit of Jonathan Carver, an 18th century British explorer, whose big fixation in the afterlife was trying to remember where he put this gosh darn land deed. Now, apparently there's actually quite a bit of debate about the land deed and Carver himself. While the deed supposedly lays claim to a huge portion of Wisconsin, some scholars believe that if it existed at all, it was likely just a swindle. Carver himself died penniless, and there's also very little evidence that he would have been as far north as Summerwind at all. So, in spite of all this, Bobber claimed to have had extensive contact with Carver, and through such assorted means as dreams, trances, Ouija sessions, and automatic writing, and that the spirit of Carver made it very clear that this deed was in a black box somewhere in the foundations of Summerwind. Now, needless and deedless to say, it was never found. And this really brings to mind for me actually a lot of encounters with the Men in Black, strange as it is. Because in many of these cases, they promise their contacts these artifacts, or sometimes they even give them artifacts which tend to have the strange tendency to vanish. Kind of almost like a bad party trick of some sort. So, not really sure. But anyway, Bobber abandoned the home in the 1980s, and in 1986 it was purchased again by someone who had grand plans of converting it into an inn. However, in 1988 it burned to the ground. Most accounts say that it was struck by lightning, some people believe it was torched by arsons, but regardless, all that remains today are the foundations and a portion of a chimney. Now, regardless of the actual nature of the possible paranormal activity of Summerwind, what's almost more compelling is the effect it seems to have on people. I mean, most accounts I've read of paranormal investigations that have gone there have this hefty emotional response to the location, akin to Keel's zone of fear. And of course, the Hinshaws experienced vast emotional turmoil during their stay there as well. Whether this is due to ghosts, a lot of people believe that haunted locations, the ghosts want them to leave, or it's an evil presence or something like that. Or simply some bad case of electromagnetic sensitivity or another form of radiation. Who's really to say? The aspect, again, of the mysterious land deed, the disappearing corpse, the 2 shots in the door that seem to take 50 years, it's kind of almost like I said earlier, bad party tricks, or the so-called trickster aspect of some paranormal phenomena. Whatever this stuff is, it really appears to, whether intentionally or not, kind of give people the runaround on shifty facts and even shiftier footing. It's also interesting to note that the apparition that was most commonly observed, the woman in white, is an archetypal figure across occult, fairy, and UFO lore. With all that said, for every claim that I mentioned of Summerwind, there's probably like 5 more. Apparently this place was just some sort of ghost factory back when it was standing, though the estate is still said to harbor as many ghosts, or whatever you want to call it, as it did when it was still standing. And yeah, it definitely is a huge part of Wisconsin's weird legacy. Before I go, I would also like to mention that if you would like to catch part 2 of my interview with Steve Ward on his podcast, The High Strangeness Factor, on the Paranormal UK Radio Network, this month it's from Monday's date, the 4th. So yeah, be sure to tune in. And with that said, I am just another tinfoil hat, signing off.
doing?